Hey there, in this video I'm going to be covering why you might not be improving on flexibility despite stretching all the time. So what we need to understand here, there's three big factors here when it comes to your flexibility. One is how often you stretch the muscle and how deep you get into your stretch. Two is during the other 23 hours when you're not exercising, what positions are those muscles in throughout the day that you're trying to lengthen. The third thing here is, are you doing resistance training for the muscle that you're trying to lengthen? So let's start off here with some examples when it comes to the second and third things. So the first one here is you're just sitting at a desk. So you got your hands here on a desk, just sitting here on the desk all day. So this is causing the shoulder blades to elevate. So since those so if you're sitting like this for 8 hours a day, stretching the upper traps for 2 minutes each day is not going to undo 8 hours of the scapula elevated. So then when it comes to sitting like this at a desk, the shoulder's also in a lot of flexion here. So this is going to make the anterior deltoid very tight too. So even if you're stretching your anterior deltoid here for 2 minutes every day, this isn't going to undo the 8 hours of sitting in shoulder flexion. Now let's say when you sit down, you're just letting this upper back here hunch over like this. And the shoulders rounding forward like this. Well, if you sit like that for 8 hours every day and you stretch your pecs here for like 2 minutes each day, again, we cannot undo 8 hours of the pecs being shortened by just fully lengthening them for 2 minutes each day. So what you can do here is, after sitting for an hour, stretch each of those overactive muscles that you're trying to make more flexible. So then it'll help you sit upright throughout the day. And then also just be more conscious of how you're sitting throughout the day. So now let's look at some examples here when it comes to the lower body. So if you sit down with your hips just touching the backrest here like this, and then you're just kind of leaning forward like this, you're going to make the hip flexors here very tight. And then let's say this lower back's rounded. So this lower back here is rounded, but you're just sitting like this all the time. Well, then you're making your hamstrings and hip flexors very tight here. So then when we look at an example here when it comes to stretching, you're trying to do this stretch here and you just cannot go down and get down any further. Well, your hip flexors and hamstrings are very tight because you're in a lot of hip flexion here, but then you also kind of got that posterior pelvic tilt due to that rounded lower back. So you need to make sure your lumbar here is straight. And you gotta make sure when you sit that you're only in 90-degree hip flexion here, that you aren't getting past that here. So you don't want to get into more hip flexion than you need. So now an example here of when you just have tight hamstrings, if you just kind of slouch like this. So this would cause the lower back to round. The hip flexors would not be tight. But again here, since the lumbar is rounding, you're kind of getting into more of that posterior pelvic tilt, which is going to shorten the hamstrings. So now, if you're sitting like this, it's going to be very hard to make your hip adductors more flexible because your hips being adducted here for those 8 hours you sit in this position. And again here, you're just going to do this stretch here every day and try to undo that. But you need to really pay more attention to your sitting position. So have the hips a little more abducted like this here. Now, the next thing here is you cross the ankles over like this. So what's this do here? This is going to externally rotate the hips. So if you sit like this all the time, your hips are going to be externally rotated. So if you have a tight piriformis and you're just like foam rolling and stretching it every day and it's always staying tight, well, you could try to not sit like this. Have those hips to be internally rotated more like this. Let's say you sit with your hips touching the backrest and then you're facing forward, so you got your chest up like this. Well, this right here will cause the erector spinae to be tight. So you want this lower back here to be straight. If your lower back's arched for the whole 8 hours you sit, well, you're obviously going to have a tight erector spinae. It doesn't matter how much you foam roll it. You're really going to need a foam roll it a lot to undo all it being in this shortened position for all that time. So right here, the proper way to sit here so you don't develop these muscle imbalances and can become more flexible is have those hips touch the backrest here, so you don't really get into that posterior pelvic tilt, but then have the lower back and upper back kind of be touching this backrest here like this. So this will keep the lumbar neutral, so you don't have any excessive flexion or extension there. And then when it comes to the shoulders and neck here, just keep those shoulder blades down and back. And then keep the neck here straight. It can be slightly rounded here as long as this upper back is not rounded. So if this upper back's straight, then you can keep the neck here slightly rounded. Do not arch the neck. The biggest problem here is people round the upper back and then arch the neck to overcompensate for that so I can look straight ahead. So shoulders down and back, neck straight and slightly arched. Now when it comes to the hips here, so make sure those hips are touching the backrest here, so we don't get into that posterior pelvic tilt, causing the hamstrings to get tight. And then do not cross the legs. So if anything, kind of have those hips out a little further when you sit like this. But then again here, do not have those ankles rolled over like this. So still have the feet flat, just have those hips apart a little more. So now when it comes to sleeping positions, first of all, if you sleep on your side, it's going to cause lots of problems here. So you sleep on your side here, this neck here is going to this side of the upper traps is going to get a lot more tight. This side will be good, but this side's going to be shortened throughout the whole 8 hours you sleep. And then if your shoulders, a lot of times people that sleep on their side, their shoulder here will be out in front like this. And the same thing with this one here. So when you sleep on your back here, the shoulders will tend to move back more. But if you're on your side here, they're going to start to round forward like this. Now the next problem here with sleeping on your side is the hip flexors. When you sleep like this, it's so important here that you don't have your hips flexed like this, because this right here is going to make if the hips are flexed like this all night, it's going to be very tough to just undo that through a few minutes of stretching if they're flexed like this all night. And then now the next problem with this is the hips are very close together. They're almost crossing over each other. So this right here again is going to cause the hip adductors to be tight. So if you sit with your legs crossed and then sleep like this, well, it's no wonder your hip adductors don't have much range of motion. Now, when it comes to sleeping just on your back, this would be better here, but there's still some things you don't want to do here. So again, do not cross the legs like this. This will make your hip adductors very tight. And then do not have those feet turn out like this. So do not have your feet and knees point out like this. This will make your hip external rotators tight. Now the last one here when it comes to the tight calves, if you tuck your covers in, do not make it super tight, because when the covers are tucked in tight, those feet won't be able to point up. Those feet will have to just be pointing straight like this. So now your ankles are in its full range of plantar flexion throughout those whole 8 hours. This is going to cause your calves here to be very tight. So make sure that your covers are not pushing those toes to point straight ahead. Make sure those toes, for the most part, are pointing up. Doing resistance training can affect the length of your muscles too. So for example here, if you're doing lots of leg curls, this is going to shorten the hamstrings. So if you're stretching them all the time, it's still going to be very hard to lengthen them if you're doing leg curls all the time. Now if you only do them once a week, that should be fine, as long as that's the only exercise you're doing for the hamstrings. But if you're isolating them all the time, what happens here is they'll become shorter, because then what's happening here is the resistance is pulling its two attachment points apart, and they have to shorten to pull those resistance points together. So after doing that, if they can stay shortened, they'll become stronger and be able to continue to pull those points together and do a better job at it. You also will see this happen with other muscles, for example, isolating calves, or if you're just bench pressing all the time. It's going to be very hard to get your shoulder all the way back because of those tight pecs from benching all the time. And then, of course, shoulder shrugs. So it's going to be very hard to get your shoulder blades down if you're doing shoulder shrugs all the time. So when it comes to resistance training, what will be a better option here is to strengthen your underactive muscles. So for example here, if you're trying to do the splits or whatever, or increase range of motion here this way, do not use the hip adductor machine. This will make it a lot harder. Instead, just focus on only do abducting exercise for the hips, no adducting. So you can use this hip abductor machine, but what I think would be better here, because this is just going to be a horizontal abduction of the hip, is instead just take a cable and then abduct the hip out like this. And then, so now when it comes to doing this stretch right here, so strengthening the hip flexors and hamstrings will just make these muscles here more tight. Instead, focus on isolating the glutes. One thing I would recommend here is just extending the hip back like this and keeping the knee straight so the hamstrings don't take over. And then when it comes to lengthening the pecs and increasing range of motion in the shoulders, doing a wide grip roll, a close grip roll, and reverse flies, they can help strengthen the rhomboids, lats, and posterior deltoid to get those shoulder blades together and then get the shoulder to move back more, so to help you lengthen the pecs more. Alright, so I know it was a lot here. A quick recap of what we went through is focus on those other 23 hours when you're not exercising, the positions you're in. So be conscious of your posture when you're sitting, how you sit. Make sure you aren't just in that. Make sure you aren't causing your tight muscle to be shortened throughout those whole 8 hours. And then same thing when you sleep. Yes, you cannot sleep in the same position all night, but just before you go to bed, think about that. And then when it comes to strengthening here, strengthen those underactive muscles, not the overactive muscles. Alright, so if you found this video helpful, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more videos like this, subscribe to my channel. And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments.